Okay, here we are with Stockholm-based Daniel Firth, who's the program director for transport and urban planning at C40 cities. Thank you for being here. We've been chatting for a while, and now we're going to do a city rating for not one or two, but three cities. So for your hometown of Manchester, Vancouver, BC, where you lived, and where you currently live in Stockholm. So our ratings are on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 is the lowest, 10 is the highest. It's not meant to be a quantitative, study score, but something to spark conversation and reflect on your perception. So let's start with Stockholm, where you are right now. Walkability.
So I think Stockholm's a pretty walkable city. I'm going to give it an 8 for summertime and maybe a 6 for wintertime. And two reasons it's worse in winter. I think one is the obvious, there is snow and ice, and however good you are at clearing snow and ice, you can't get rid of all of it. And so it becomes quite a big barrier, particularly for people with mobility impairment. The other thing is that it's dark, and Stockholm is built like a series of islands of walkability around the metro station. So if you stay in your neighborhood, it's really walkable. If you want to walk to the next neighborhood, you're probably walking through a field or through somewhere where, if it's dark, is maybe not the greatest place to be. In summer, it's fine. Winter, maybe a bit more of a challenge.
True, right. Okay, what about public transportation for Stockholm?
So it's really difficult talking about these three together, because that makes me want to give Stockholm a higher mark, because objectively Stockholm's public transport is fantastic, and I'm going to give it a 9, which is probably controversial among a lot of Stockholmers, and is probably a reflection of the fact that I live quite close to the middle of Stockholm, where the transit is even better. I think the further out you get, the harder it is. It's very oriented to getting you to and from downtown. So as soon as you want to do anything else, it doesn't work nearly as well. I think the other thing dragging it down is it's expensive. And, if you're on a good wage like I am, then that's not a problem. But for an awful lot of people, it's a really big barrier.
Okay, interesting. And then cycling for Stockholm.
So I worked for the city of Stockholm for many years, and I know that a lot of people will be very angry if I give it a higher grade for cycling. Yeah. It's got way better in the last few years, I have to say. The last 10 years or so, it's been an absolute transformation. But there's still a long way to go. So I'm going to say maybe a 6. I think where it's good, it's excellent. Where it's not, it's terrible. And it's just not joined up enough at the moment. But there are really high ambitions to make it better.
Right. Well, one thing I think is interesting when these scores spark conversation, if you ask your friends, over coffee, fika, or happy hour, is to also reflect on 10 years ago and think about how your score would change from then to now. So let's move over to British Columbia, Vancouver, where you lived. So let's, and I know this is going to be tricky too with the inner city and then the issues of the greater region, but let's go for walkability in Vancouver.
I think in the city, and particularly in the inner city, it's fantastic, and I'm probably going to give it I need to balance the whole city, so maybe a 6 or a 7. I think, again, where it's good, it's fantastic, and I would give it a 10. Where it's bad, it's awful, and there are, even within the city of Vancouver, neighborhoods that don't really have functioning sidewalks. So a real city of contrast.
Okay, so is that for the inner city, or if you're averaging out with the whole metro region in mind?
That was an average. So the neighborhood where I lived, which is called West End, in the middle of the city, very, really beautiful, near the beaches and the park and walkable to downtown, I would give probably a 9 or a 10. But yeah, the other neighborhoods would be way, way lower. And so the averaging out comes to, did I say 7? I think I did.
Yep. So what about public transportation for Vancouver?
Again, is a real picture of where you are. And again, it's nowhere near as good as Stockholm's. So I'm making an unfair comparison, but at the same time, it's probably way better than a lot of other cities in North America. So I want to give it a 7 as well, which I think some Vancouverites might find a bit generous. But I think comparing to peer cities in the region, it's punching above its weight.
And cycling.
Cycling, again, is a bit like Stockholm. They've done a lot very recently, and parts of it are now fantastic, but there are so many parts that aren't nearly good enough, and it's a very disjointed network. So I'd probably give that a 6, the same as Stockholm.
Despite that, is there a strong cycling culture there?
Yes, absolutely, I would say. And really interesting, I think quite a different cycling culture to Stockholm. So Stockholm has a bit of a reputation for being these kind of mammals cycling culture, middle-aged men in lycra. And I think that was true maybe 6-7 years ago. It's changed quite a lot. I feel like Vancouver in its cycling culture is a few years ahead of Stockholm. And Vancouver is just a very outdoorsy kind of city generally because of its location, and everybody does really outdoorsy stuff all weekend. So I think maybe that kind of cycling and outdoorsy culture is rubbing off in some ways.
It's very lifestyle. Okay, last but not least, Manchester, hometown.
So the caveat that I haven't lived in Manchester for about 20 years. So when I go, I'm only visiting my family.
Right.
But where I grew up and the neighborhoods where my family now live, they're not particularly central, they're kind of near suburbs, I think are actually really walkable. And like a lot of older European cities, we were talking about it earlier, it's got the bones of a really walkable city and wouldn't need much to make it actually quite fantastic. So I'm going to give that a 8. Which feels quite generous now because it's the same as Stockholm.
Interesting, yeah. And public transportation.
So when I was young, transportation was really good. It was a really great integrated system. We lived close to there's a really good commuter rail network, and the buses at the time were really good. What happened, how old was I? I don't know, 12 or 14 maybe. They privatized all of the buses in Manchester, and it just kind of completely shattered this very carefully planned integrated network, and the buses just really became quite awful, to be honest. They were like the oldest, the smelliest diesel buses they could find, and they competed for fares. Like literally they would like compete to get to the bus stop first to pick up the passengers, and you never knew how much it was going to cost you. They're doing a lot to make it better. They've built a metro system, but it's still pretty poor. I would say is maybe a 5.
Interesting, but if you reflect on your childhood, what would it be what score would you give it in your childhood from those memories?
Oh, I think that it would have been a 7 at least, maybe even 8.
It'd be interesting to hear what they're doing now to change and improve that.
Yeah, they've got a lot of really ambitious plans, and the new mayor is wanting to kind of go back to a more integrated network, better timetable planning, better integration of fares, and I think that will make a really big difference. But it's such a shame because I think the levels of public transport use were pretty high when I was a kid, and they just fell off a cliff when this privatization was done.
Okay, and cycling for Manchester.
I actually don't know. I haven't cycled in Manchester since I was about 18, so
okay.
I might have to give a pass on that one. But I'd love to hear from someone else.
Sometimes people are passing on areas they're not so familiar with, which is okay, and it also next time you're there, you can you'll have a little observation for what's going on with cycling there.
Definitely.
Interesting. This was a lot of fun. Thank you very much, and I look forward. Thank you.